Dr. Garassi, I present Brandon Stanton for the degree of Doctor of Humane Letters, honoris causa. Trustees Warren Prochi and Diane Powers will assist with placing the hood on the shoulders of Brandon Stanton. Brandon Stanton has become a nationally celebrated phenomenon. As founder of the incredibly popular Humans of New York blog, Stanton has endeared himself to millions of Americans. In fact, as of January 2016, the young man has well over 17 million likes on Facebook and around 4.5 million followers on Instagram. Since 2010, Brandon Stanton, armed with his trusty camera, has created hundreds of portraits of ordinary people living and working primarily in New York City. These often inspirational photos are more and more accompanied by short conversations with his subjects, shedding light on their lives, their struggles, and their hopes. Brandon grew up in Marietta, Georgia, a suburb of Atlanta. After majoring in history at the University of Georgia, he headed to Chicago, where he worked for a time trading bonds with a well-known firm. Then, in 2010, Brandon's life changed dramatically. He bought a camera and started taking photographs in downtown Chicago on the weekends. When he lost his job as a trader of bonds, he decided to pursue photography full-time. Things began to move quickly, more quickly than Brandon could have anticipated. Because of its well-known diversity, Brandon decided to move to New York City to capture on film the kaleidoscopic panoply of persons in the Big Apple. He set out to photograph 10,000 New Yorkers and to plot their portraits on a map of the city. Eventually, his photographs were shifted to the Facebook page entitled Humans of New York. He soon began adding captions and quotes to his photographs. Eventually, the quotes evolved into short but often poignant interviews. Stanton's first book, Humans of New York, was published in October of 2013. Even before the book's released, he was interviewed by Bill Ware for a segment on ABC News. The book went to the top of the charts on the New York Times nonfiction bestsellers list in November of 2013. The book remained on the list for 26 weeks, again reaching the #1 position in December of 2014. In December of 2013, Brandon Stanton was named one of Time magazine's 30 people under 30 that were changing the world. In August of 2014, Stanton's inspiring ride continued as he traveled to the Middle East to photograph people of the region as part of a 50-day trip through 10 countries under the auspices of the United Nations. Then in January of 2015, Stanton was invited to the Oval Office to interview President Barack Obama. It was also in January of 2015, as he was out photographing those humans of New York, that Brandon had a serendipitous encounter with 13-year-old Vidal Chastanet, the young man who attended Mott Hall Bridges Academy in Brownsville, Brooklyn. That meeting and that interview, of course, led Brandon Stanton to the Academy and to his meeting with its principal, Nadia Lopez. And that meeting, as we now know, led to one of Stanton's most celebrated blogs and the fundraising campaign that raised $1.4 million and made possible the Academy trip to Harvard and a very generous scholarship fund for Mott Hall scholars. It was young Vidal Chastanet that made possible that first meeting between Nadia Lopez and Brandon Stanton. And it is now Wagner College that has the honor and the privilege of again bringing together these two remarkable people. Thank you, Brandon Stanton. You honor us with your presence here today.
With the authority vested in me by the Board of Trustees of Wagner College and the laws of the state of New York, I hereby confer upon you, Brandon Stanton, the degree of Doctor of Humane Letters, honoris causa, and forever be remembered in the halls of fame of Wagner College alumni. Congratulations.
Damn it, Nadia. She head faked me before this thing. We're in line. I go, Nadia, I don't want to speak after you. I've seen her speak 6 times. And she goes, they didn't even tell me I was speaking. I don't have anything prepared. It's not going to be anything. And she comes. Okay. So my story starts 5 years ago when I lost my job. I was working as a bond trader in Chicago, and it became apparent that things were going very poorly. It became apparent that I was going to get fired. It's a good crowd. And that thought just terrified me. It just terrified me because I had had a really roundabout way to get to where I was. I had flunked out of the University of Georgia. Yeah? Go Dogs. I went and lived in my grandparents' basement and took the public transportation to community college and worked at Applebee's and got my grades back up. Then went back to University of Georgia, did well. And then I got this great job out of college. I was a history major. I just kind of fell into it. I had a friend that was like a finance genius, and he'd gone to a great school, got this great job, and he told me he could get me an interview. And I got the job, and I was so excited about having that job because I got to go back to the same family members that I had to sheepishly kind of look in the face when I flunked out of college and told them that I didn't really have anything going for me and I didn't really know what I was going to do with my life. You know, I got to go back to those same family members and tell them I had this exciting job in Chicago. I was relative value trading in fixed income securities. Easier than it sounds, believe it or not. And all of that was going to be taken from me. And I was terrified. I think I was still feeling so much shame for having kind of hit rock bottom. And I was running from that so hard that the thought of losing that prestige terrified me. And so for 2 years, I obsessed over this job. It was all I thought about. I could be in the front row of my favorite band, and I would still be thinking, what are markets going to do Monday morning? How am I going to turn this around? How am I going to keep this job? And then on the day that I lost my job, it was surprisingly a great day. I took a walk that day. When this terrifying thing happened to me, I took a walk afterwards, and I noticed something. I noticed that all of these thoughts and all of this energy that I had put into trying to keep that job, I could now direct towards anything that I wanted to do. All of this all of this thought that I put towards prestige, all of this energy that I'd put into having something that I could be proud to tell my parents about and my family about, something that sounded prestigious, all that energy that I had put into clinging to that, I could now direct in any direction that I wanted to and do something for no other reason than because I enjoyed doing it. And I made a decision on that day that has absolutely transformed my life. I said, I spent the last 2 years trying to make money, and I had a narrative I was telling myself. I told myself, I don't overly care about money, but I'm going to make my money first. I'm going to get some security, I'm going to get a buffer, and then I'm going to pivot, and I'm going to do what I really want to do. But at the end of 2 years, I'd lost my job, and I looked back, and I had no money. I had no money, and I lost 2 years of time. Not just time where my physical body was in an office that I was doing because it was prestigious, but 2 years where I lost my thoughts to something that I was doing because it was prestigious. And I realized that no amount of money that I could have made during those 2 years could have ever bought that time back. Time is the most valuable resource that you have. Time. It's the one thing that money cannot buy. Yet we spend our time, we fill our time trying to accumulate resources that are far less valuable. Money's just one of them. Prestige is another. Prestige is in extra lines on your transcript, extra lines on your resume, extra things you can tell your family members that you think will impress them. And I made a decision that I'm going to spend the foreseeable future, this next phase of my life, trying to make just enough money to where I control my time. And at the time, what I loved to do was photograph. And I'd only been photographing for a few months. One of the great parts about Humans of New York is that it's existed 6 years, and I took my first photograph about 6 years ago. I moved to New York with the idea that I was going to photograph 10,000 people on the streets and plot their photos on a map. That was my vague idea of how I was going to make this work. I think I thought that, if I could orient my photography in such a way that it was interesting and captivating to other people, I could draw attention to my work and maybe build up enough of a name for myself that I could sell prints and pay just to do it all day long. That was my initial idea. And if there's one thing I want you guys to notice who follow Humans of New York, it's nothing like that today. The Humans of New York that I moved to New York with absolutely nothing. When I say absolutely nothing, I mean nothing. I had 2 suitcases. I didn't know anybody here. I lived in Bedford-Stuyvesant in a sublease with 3 other people I did not know. I slept on a mattress in the middle of the floor of a bedroom, nothing on the walls, no furniture. I didn't go out, didn't go to restaurants, didn't go to concerts, didn't socialize. I did nothing but photograph, because that was my dedication to myself, that I was going to figure out a way to do what I loved all day long. And I want you to notice all that risk. Everything that I risked was on a project that looks nothing like what later became successful. For those of you who know Humans of New York isn't even really about photography anymore. The photography is secondary. There's no map. There's not 10,000 portraits on a map. Humans of New York is a series of deep interviews that I do with strangers on the street. How did I come up with that idea? By getting out there and working every single day. By photographing every single day, I learned that a picture of a person was more interesting than one without a person. A portrait of a stranger was even more interesting. If I added a quote, it was even more interesting. If the quote got longer, it was even more interesting. And if I spent 45 minutes to an hour with this person, I could learn things about their lives that they had never told anybody in their life. And that was the idea that led to 2 #1 New York Times best-selling books, 20 million followers, all the things that they said before I got on stage. I didn't mean for that to be funny. If I had waited for that idea, I would never have started. It didn't start with a perfectly formed idea. It started with a commitment to myself that I was going to find a way to do what I loved all day long. So you cannot wait for the perfect idea before you begin. If you're writing in your journal, if you're sketching out notes, if you're writing in the margins of your calendar for your business idea, your book idea, the idea for your band, that thing you really want to do, and you're planning and planning and planning and waiting until that idea is perfect, until it's risk-free, until you have no chance of failing and being laughed at by your friends and your family and losing some of that prestige, if you're waiting for the moment that the idea is perfect, it will never happen. You must start before you're ready. You must begin the thing that you dream about doing before you are ready to do it, and you must trust that you will become who you need to be, and your idea will become what it needs to be along the way. Congratulations, and thanks for having me.